They didn't whisper it. They cheered it when a father dragged his heavy daughter by the arm barefoot down the courthouse steps and handed her off like spoiled meat to a man in chains. Not because the man wanted her, but because her father didn't. No papers, no consent, just the trade of shame for silence. And the man, the slave, he looked her in the eye and didn't look away. That day, the town called it justice, but the truth, it was the beginning of a love no one ever believed she deserved. Her name was Willa, but no one said it out loud anymore. Not her father, who only ever muttered the girl under his breath. Not the servants, who had been told to serve her meals in the pantry to avoid offending guests. Not even the town preacher, who always squinted like she wasn't quite human. Willa was 20, soft-faced, painfully round, and completely invisible unless someone needed someone to mock. Since her mother died 5 years ago, food had become her silence. Biscuits and jam. Pies at midnight, thick spoonfuls of gravy that numbed the ache in her chest. And her father, Judge Carver, he became less of a parent and more of a shadow. A man too proud to beat his daughter, but too cruel to touch her hand. So when he opened the courthouse doors one blazing July afternoon, grabbed her by the arm and dragged her outside without shoes. She didn't scream. She just clutched the only thing that still felt hers, an old book of poems her mother once read. That's when she saw him, the man in chains. He stood tall, silent, wrists shackled, shirt torn, black as midnight, and stronger than any man in town. Though he carried himself like someone already beaten by life. They called him Elijah, a runaway soul cheap to work the mines. The mines had closed, but Elijah hadn't been freed, just left to rot in a cabin on Carver's land. That afternoon, he was dragged out like livestock. And Judge Carver dressed in full judicial black spit at the dust near his feet. "I'll strike a deal with the law," he said to the sheriff. "This man works off the rest of his sentence by taking my daughter off my hands." Laughter rippled through the crowd like thunder. Sheriff Boone blinked, unsure if it was a joke. It wasn't. Elijah didn't flinch. He looked at Willa, not with pity, not with desire, but with a stillness that made her knees shake. "She eats like a hog, does nothing all day," her father added. "You'll feed her, house her, keep her out of my sight." No one spoke. No one protested. And in front of the entire town, the judge walked away, leaving Willa standing alone next to the man in chains. Elijah said nothing as they walked. He didn't reach for her, didn't slow for her, just kept a steady pace toward a cabin she had never seen. Far from town, near the edge of the pines. By the time they arrived, her feet were blistered raw. Still, she didn't cry. He stopped at the porch and unlocked the door with a rusty key tied to his belt. Willa waited for him to enter. Instead, he tossed the key into her hand and turned away. "Ain't mine, ain't yours, but it's what we got." The cabin smelled like damp wood and old ashes. One bed, a half-broken stove, a table with one chair. She turned back, but Elijah was already outside, lying flat on the porch boards, using his arms as a pillow. That night, Willa cried into her fists. Not because of the room, the dirt, the hunger, but because for the first time in her life, a man had looked at her and didn't look away. In the morning, Elijah chopped wood while she sat on the steps watching. He said nothing to her. She tried once, her voice barely audible. "I can help." He looked up, wiped sweat from his brow. "You ever split wood before?" She shook her head. "Didn't think so." He handed her a bucket instead, then fetch water from the creek half a mile down. That was all. But something about the way he didn't laugh, didn't pity her, didn't soften his voice. It lit a strange sharp flame inside her. For the first time in years, she wanted to try. Even if her arms ached, even if she spilled half the water, even if she was panting by the time she got back, he didn't praise her. But he didn't mock her either. And that was enough. Days passed. She learned how to stir beans without burning them, how to scrub Elijah's shirts in the creek and hang them over pine branches, how to dig a trench before rain made the cabin flood. And Elijah. He learned how to let her exist. Then one quiet evening, as she handed him a plate of cornbread and beans, he said it, "Thank you, Willa." She froze. It had been 5 years since someone said her name. Her lips quivered. Her throat tightened. She nodded and sat on the floor beside the fire. He didn't say it again that night. But the warmth stayed in her bones. She started drawing again. Charcoal on old paper, the cabin, the creek, a horse that never existed. But most of all, Elijah's hands. Rough, strong, scarred. "My mama taught me," she said, showing him the sketch before she died. He took the paper, looked long at it. "Looks like the hands of someone real." She laughed, cheeks pink. "They are." It came quick. A fever that shook Elijah to the bone. He collapsed while hauling water. She dragged him inside, sweating and muttering, his body hot as fire. Willa wiped his brow, boiled herbs, sang songs she barely remembered. He called out names in his sleep. Abigail, Mother, Chains. She didn't leave his side for 3 days. When he finally opened his eyes, breath shallow, he whispered, "You stayed." She took his hand, not afraid of the sweat. "You're the first person who ever saw me." He blinked. "You're the first who ever stayed." It was weeks before Elijah could walk without his knees buckling. She helped him each day, offering her shoulder, even though he weighed twice as much, and she had never thought herself strong. He never asked for her help, but he never pushed it away either. They moved through the days like two ghosts who had finally found each other in the same fog. She cooked now, not perfectly, but with heart. He taught her to plant beans and string lines for drying clothes. She learned how to patch a boot, how to carry water without spilling, how to sharpen a blade without slicing her fingers. And he learned to laugh again. Once while she stirred soup over the stove, he leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. "I ever tell you," he said slowly, "you walk like a tree stump wearing shoes." She turned, hands on her hips, mouth open. "You don't even wear shoes," she shot back. They both burst into laughter. It echoed through the woods, scaring birds out of nearby trees. At night, they sat by the fire, sharing stories that neither of them had told anyone before. He told her about the old river he used to fish from as a boy, about a dog he had named Gideon, and a girl named Abigail who once braided a piece of leather into his wrist as a promise she never kept. She told him about her mother's perfume, about how she used to sneak into her closet and sleep curled up beneath the dresses just to pretend she wasn't alone. She never told him about the nights her father slammed the door when he saw her coming, or about the time he told a dinner guest she was only fit for feeding, not marrying. Some memories had no place between firelight and kindness. One day while tending the small patch of garden behind the cabin, she looked up and said, "I think I know why my father gave me to you." He wiped dirt from his brow, not looking at her. "Why?" "Because he thought you'd hate me." Elijah looked at her then. Really looked. I think he hoped I would. She nodded, pressing her lips tight. But you didn't, she said softly. No, he replied without hesitation. I didn't. That night, as she folded laundry and he whittled a bit of cedar into what might have been a spoon or maybe a rabbit, the quiet stretched between them like an old blanket. Heavy, warm, familiar. I was thinking, he said, not lifting his eyes. When spring comes, we should leave. She looked up. Leave? He nodded. There's a place called Willow Ridge. Quiet. I heard folks don't ask questions there. We could start over. Build something. She swallowed hard. He paused, then. Set the carving down. I mean, if you'd want to. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. She didn't answer with words. Just leaned forward, gently. Rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of running away. She dreamt of planting things that could grow. The days that followed were slow but rich. She sketched again, not out of sorrow, but out of joy. She drew the cabin, the creek, Elijah's crooked smile. When he pretended not to like her cornbread. He built her a chair just her size with wide arms and smooth edges. She cried when he gave it to her. He pretended not to notice. Then, as spring came the knock on the door. 3 sharp raps like a hammer on bone. Elijah answered it, stepping outside before she could even stand. It was the sheriff. Boone, the same man who once laughed when Judge Carver handed her off like cattle. You've had her long enough, Boone said, looking past Elijah into the cabin. The judge wants her back. Elijah didn't move. She ain't a sack of grain, he said. She is not property. Boone tilted his head. She was never yours, Elijah. You know that the law don't see her any different than a mule on loan. And the judge wants his mule returned from inside. She heard every word, and she knew this day would come. Deep down, she'd always known. She stepped outside, chin up, barefoot in the mud. If you're going to take one of us, she said, you will have to take both. Boone blinked. You planning to run with him, girl? I'm not running, she said. I'm choosing. He laughed, but not with humor. You're choosing a runaway with scars and nothing to his name. I'm choosing the only man who ever looked at me and didn't see something broken. Boone spat into the dirt. You're both mad. Then his eyes darkened. You step back on Judge Carver's land again. Either of you, you won't get a trial. You'll get a tree. And a rope. Elijah's jaw clenched. His hand twitched at his side, but he didn't move. We won't come back, he said. Boone nodded once and left. They stood in silence after the horses rode off. The wind picked up. The pines groaned. The sun dropped behind the hills. She turned to Elijah. Willow Ridge. He met her gaze. Tomorrow. That night they packed only what mattered. Her drawings, his tools, a piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth and a sliver of cedar shaped like a rabbit. They didn't sleep. Just watched the fire burn low and the stars come out one by one. As dawn broke, she looked at the cabin one last time. She had arrived here with nothing but shame. She was leaving with love. Not the kind that came with kisses or sweet words or silver rings, but the kind that looked you in the eye after you spilled soup and said, "Try again." The kind that handed you a chair shaped for your body. The kind that stayed when you were sick. Quiet and angry. The kind that didn't ask you to change just to stay. They left before the sun rose. The world was still blue and soft. The kind of quiet that only comes before dawn when even the birds haven't begun to trust the morning. Willa walked in front, a bundle tied to her back. Elijah followed behind, dragging a small wooden cart with whatever he couldn't carry. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. By the time the sun warmed their necks, they were deep in the woods, far enough from town that even the wind sounded different, safer, freer. Sometime in the afternoon, Elijah stopped near a small stream. He didn't say anything, but Willa knew they'd rest there. He sat by the water, rolling his shoulders, groaning quietly as he dipped his hands into the cool current. She handed him a cloth, crouching beside him. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I've walked longer, just not with a cart or with someone beside me." She smiled, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. He didn't flinch. "I've never walked anywhere that wasn't away from something." He looked at her, eyes softening. "You ever walk towards something?" She thought about it, then shook her head. "No." He glanced back at the water. "Me neither. Not till now." They sat in silence again. The birds were louder. The trees taller, shadows gentler. After a while, she asked, "Who was Abigail?" His hands paused in the water. He didn't look up, but his voice came low and steady. "She was the first girl I ever loved." Willa didn't speak. "She was the daughter of the man who owned my mama. We were kids, maybe 10. She didn't care that I was different. We'd steal apples, race horses, draw pictures in the dust. I thought she was magic." He pulled his hands from the stream, flexing them slowly. "She told me once she'd marry me when we were older. Said she'd run away with me. I believed her." "What happened?" Willa asked. Elijah's eyes didn't blink. "She got married to a white banker from Georgia. Her father promised her off the moment we were caught holding hands." Willa felt her heart tighten. Not from jealousy, but something deeper. That sharp ache of knowing someone had once been told they were unworthy of love. Just like her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded. "I learned that day that people will say they love you right up until someone more convenient comes along." She reached out and took his hand. "I'm not convenient." He looked down at their joined fingers. His voice cracked, just barely. "No, you're real." They didn't speak for the rest of the afternoon, but their hands stayed together for a long time. That night, they found a small abandoned barn nestled behind a hill. The roof was half collapsed, but it kept the wind out. Elijah built a fire. Willa made the last of their cornmeal into cakes, burning 2 before getting the pan to stay level on the stones. They sat across from each other, the orange firelight flickering between their faces. "You ever scared?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "All the time. I mean, of this, of me, of what comes next." He turned the stick in the fire. "I've been owned, starved, whipped, forgotten, and now I'm sitting here with a woman who gives me her last bite of food without blinking." He met her gaze. "I'm scared. But not of you." She swallowed. "I'm scared you'll wake up one day and realize I'm still the fat girl no one wanted." He shifted closer. "You're not the fat girl." She scoffed. "You don't see me." "I do," he said. "I see your hands, how they shake when you're scared, but you still reach out anyway. I see how you hum when you cook even though you think No one's listening. I see how you let me be quiet without asking why. He leaned forward closer. I see you, Willa. All of you. And in that old broken barn, she didn't look away. He kissed her soft, slow, unsure, like he wasn't claiming anything, just asking. She kissed him back, not because she needed to be loved, but because for the first time in her life, she was. The next morning, they crossed a ridge that led into a long golden valley. Willow Ridge lay beyond the bend, still hidden by trees. But they could smell smoke on the wind. Hearth fires, bread, civilization. Willa's heart pounded. She looked at Elijah. You think they'll take us? They don't have to, he said. We're not asking, she laughed. But it came out. Choked with nerves. I'm just scared it'll all fall apart. He touched her shoulder. Then we'll build again. The town of Willow Ridge wasn't like the others. It was smaller, quiet, a sawmill to the north, a blacksmith who tipped his hat without asking names, a shopkeeper who looked at Willa and Elijah like any other tired travelers. And said, there's a cabin down by the orchard. Old Miss Tally passed last spring. You're welcome to it if you clean it up. They cleaned it up. In 3 days, they had the floor swept, the roof patched, and a table with 2 chairs. Willa planted seeds. Elijah chopped wood. The neighbors came by one to drop off flour or blankets or a hen that didn't lay anymore. No one asked where they came from. No one called her names. And for once in her life, Willa felt small in the best way, like the world didn't center on her shame anymore. It was a month before Elijah said it. They were sitting on the porch watching the trees bend in the wind. He had just mended the rocking chair. She was drawing again, sketching the curve of his jaw while he wasn't looking. He turned to her, sudden but calm. I love you, Willa. She didn't blink. I know, she whispered. I love you, too. He looked away like he was almost too shy to hold the moment. Not like a rescue, not like a second chance. I love you like you were always meant to be mine. She set her sketch pad down and moved beside him. You're the first home I've ever had. And he wrapped his arm around her shoulder and kissed the top of her head. That night, as they lay curled together beneath a roof they fixed with their own hands, Willa said a prayer her mother once taught her. Not for forgiveness, not for thinness, not even for safety, but for thank you. Thank you for chains that led to freedom. Thank you for shame that turned into truth. Thank you for a love no one believed she'd ever find but did. Willow Ridge was quiet but not blind. The people didn't ask questions but they watched. Some with curiosity, some with quiet judgment that hung in their eyes but never reached their mouths. It was a month after they settled in when the whispers started. The blacksmith's wife, older and pinched with a mouth like vinegar, leaned over her fence one morning and said to Willa, folks talking about where he come from. That man of yours. Willa, kneeling in the dirt planting tulips, looked up. He's not mine like a coat I bought, she said gently. He's Elijah, and he came from the same kind of hurt most people pretend they never caused. The woman blinked, startled by her calm. Didn't mean no harm, she muttered, retreating. But harm didn't always need intention. It crept in through looks, through silence, through the way people hesitated before touching Elijah's hand. When he paid for goods, through how they asked her, "Are you doing okay out there?" as if love with a man like him was something to survive. Willa didn't argue with them. She just kept planting flowers. She and Elijah made a home of the old Tally cabin. He built shelves from driftwood. She painted the walls soft blue. They traded eggs for flour, and he found work at the mill. Quiet. Hard work that made his hands strong again. Sometimes Willa would walk to town just to sit beneath the willow tree in the square and sketch. People began to notice the change in her. She walked taller, laughed louder. Her clothes fit better. Not because she was thinner, but because she finally dressed for comfort, not shame. A woman from the general store once said, "You've bloomed." And Willa, smiling, replied, "No, I was always a garden. Someone just finally watered me." But not everyone wanted flowers to grow. One afternoon, while Elijah was still at work and Willa returned home from trading butter, she found a note nailed to their door. Big block letters. "You're still property." Her hand shook. She tore the paper down, heart pounding. She didn't tell Elijah. Not that night. Not the next. But she grew quieter. She smiled, but not with her eyes. She touched him, but her fingers trembled. Finally, one night as they lay side by side in bed, she whispered, "What if they are right?" He turned toward her. "Who? The people? The ones who think I don't belong with you? That you don't belong here?" He stared at her for a long time. Then slowly, he sat up, reached beneath the floorboards, and pulled out a worn piece of cloth. He unfolded it. Inside was a tiny ring. Bent, old, made of brass. "This was my mama's," he said. "Only thing she left me." He took her hand. "I was saving it. Didn't think I'd ever find someone who'd want a life with a man like me." She gasped. "Elijah, I'm not giving it because I think we need to prove anything." He said, "I'm giving it because you are not property. You are not punishment. You are not a body your father hated." His voice broke. "You're Willa and you saved me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't care if it's not gold," she whispered. "I don't care if it's not legal." She held out her hand. "I choose you." He slid the ring on her finger and they kissed like people who'd lived 10 years in the span of one. Spring turned to summer. Life became routine. Sweet. Elijah's hands were strong again. Willa's art bloomed into something people began to buy. Sketches of mothers holding children, of rivers, of hands intertwined. But nothing stays untouched forever. One humid morning, as Willa walked to town with a basket of sketches, she froze. 2 horses were tied outside the blacksmith shop. One of them bore the mark of Judge Carver. A silver K burned into the leather. She dropped the basket and ran. By the time she reached the cabin, Elijah was already standing in the yard, arms crossed, face blank. Across from him stood Boone, the sheriff, and beside him, the judge, her father. He hadn't aged much, still tall, still sharp-eyed. But something darker sat behind his expression. "Now I find you," he said to Elijah. Elijah didn't flinch. "I didn't run. I was released. Your deal ended." The judge scoffed. "She was given to you as punishment, not to marry. This," he pointed at Willa's ring, "is a disgrace." Willa stepped forward. "You disgraced me the day you gave me away. Like cattle." He looked her up and down. "You've grown more mouth and sense." She lifted her chin. "I've grown a spine." Boone shifted uncomfortably. "Judge, they are peaceful. They haven't broken any law." Carver turned on him. "You're the sheriff. Enforce something. Boone cleared his throat, looked at Elijah. You planning to leave peacefully? Elijah shook his head. No, sir, not this time. Carver's face twisted. Then I'll take her back myself. He stepped toward Willa, but Elijah moved faster. In a flash, he stood between them, broad and still, hands balled at his side. You come near her, you answer to me. Carver's voice was cold. You threatening me, boy? Elijah's eyes didn't blink. I'm promising you. Boone stepped in then, hand raised. Enough, Judge. You got no right. Okay, Elijah's free. Willa is free. If you want to fight it, go to court. But in this town, we don't trade people. Carver's nostrils flared. I'll remember this. He spat. Willa stared at him unshaken. I hope you remember everything, especially the day your daughter chose love over fear. He looked at her one last time, eyes like ice, then mounted his horse and rode off. Boone hesitated. You all right? He asked. Elijah nodded. Better than I've ever been. When the dust cleared and the road was quiet again, Willa collapsed into Elijah's arms. I thought he might try to drag me away. I would have stopped him, Elijah said softly. She buried her face in his chest. I know. That night, they sat outside the cabin, watching the stars blink through the trees. Willa held Elijah's hand in hers, thumb brushing the old scars along his knuckles. I don't care what name I was born with, she said. I only care about the one I'll leave behind. Elijah turned to her. And what name is that? She smiled. Yours. If you'll give it. He kissed her slow and deep. You already have it. And under a sky full of quiet witnesses, they held each other like two halves of a story that had always been waiting to be told. Not about shame, not about ownership, but about survival, about being seen, and about a love that the world said wasn't possible, but happened anyway. Years passed and no one came for them again. The world moved on as it always does. New families moved into Willow Ridge. Roads were widened. The willow tree in the town square grew thick enough for 3 children to sit beneath. And in the little house by the orchard, Willa and Elijah lived a quiet, beautiful life. They never had much, but what they had they shared. On Sunday mornings, Willa hung pies in muslin bags on her neighbors' porches. On stormy nights, Elijah repaired fences by lanternlight without being asked. When a widow down the road went blind, Willa brought her sketches every week and described them until the old woman wept softly and said, "That's the color I remember." No one called them slave or burden or too much anymore. They were just Willa and Elijah, the quiet couple who grew sweet peas in the front yard and left their door unlocked. Willa's hair turned silver early. Elijah's back stiffened. They slowed down, but they never lost the fire in their eyes. The kind of warmth only survivors carry. One day, a little boy came to their porch. His hat was too big and his knees were dirty. "Miss Willa," he said, holding up a broken wooden horse. "Mama said you and Mr. Elijah could fix anything." Willa took the horse, looked it over, and smiled. "Well," she said, "that's a mighty fine challenge." Elijah chuckled, taking the toy gently. "Looks like someone needs a new leg." The boy watched them in awe. "Are you two married?" Willa looked at Elijah, who was already smiling. "No paper ever said so," Elijah answered. "But I reckon we've been more married than most folks ever get." The boy nodded like that made perfect sense. When he left with the repaired toy in hand, Willa leaned into Elijah's side. "You know," she said, "sometimes I wonder what? If none of it had happened? What if I'd been born thin and wanted? What if your chains had never touched your skin? Would we still have found each other?" Elijah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I don't think love waits for perfect beginnings." Willa closed her eyes, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad we started where we did." "Me too," he said softly. "Because everything after you felt like living." Willa passed first. She was old and warm and smiling when it happened. Sketchbook on her lap, fingers stained with charcoal. Elijah found her in her rocking chair at sunrise, eyes closed, a drawing of his hands resting beneath hers. He didn't cry right away. He just sat beside her, held her hand, and whispered, "You were never a punishment." Then he pressed his forehead to hers and said the words he'd said every day for 40 years. "I see you." They buried her beneath the willow tree in the square, the very one where she once sat alone and afraid. Now it stood tall and strong, wrapped in flowers and etched with the words Elijah carved himself. She was given away like shame, but she loved like a storm and was loved like home. Elijah lived 2 years more. He spoke less, but every child in town knew they could come to his porch for stories or splinters fixed or warm cornbread. When he passed, they buried him beside her. Not as a servant, not as a ghost of shame, but as a husband, a builder, a man who turned cruelty into compassion and silence into something sacred. They say if you walk past their graves in early spring, you'll find tulips blooming in the shape of 2 hands reaching for each other. One small, one broad, both covered in dirt, both steady. And sometimes when the wind is right, you'll hear laughter. Not loud, just enough to make you believe that somewhere 2 souls are still sitting on a porch sketching a world that never quite deserved them, but somehow they made it beautiful. Anyway, if this story moved you, if you believe in love that defies judgment, in quiet strength, and in voices long silenced, then join us. Subscribe to Ironwood Narratives for more tales that honor the forgotten, the resilient, and the beautifully human. Because some stories don't shout, they stay. Bell. Subscribe now and never miss a story that lingers.